Listen. Don't scroll, not now, because this moment is not random and you are not brought here by habit or chance. You were intercepted, chosen, singled out, and before your logic interferes, you must hear this with your soul. My child, the heaviness you carry, the tiredness no sleep fixes, the pressure in your chest you never speak about is not weakness but spiritual exhaustion. Because for 7 unseen cycles, your spirit has been fighting battles your mouth never confessed, smiling while bleeding, moving while breaking, whispering how much longer when no one was listening. And heaven heard it, and understand this carefully. Something shifted 12 hours ago, not on earth but beyond it. A decision moved. A name was spoken deliberately, your name, and when it echoed, unseen forces began watching, which is why resistance followed you, doors almost opened then shut. People misunderstood you without reason. Betrayal came from directions you trusted, because you are not unlucky. You are marked, not for destruction, but for what you carry, something disruptive, something that cannot blend in. And there is a silent war around you now, a war of distraction and delay. Because if you fully awaken, systems collapse and lies expire, which is why confusion, procrastination, comfort, and old habits have tried to reclaim you recently. This is sedation, not rest. And there is a narrow window around you now measured in hours, not years. And if ignored, it doesn't disappear. It shifts and returns heavier, because clarity follows courage, not comfort. Purpose follows surrender, not understanding. And soon 3 people around you will shift. One will resent your growth. One will misunderstand your silence. One will try to pull you back into who you no longer are. This is pruning, not punishment. And isolation is not abandonment, but preparation. Because your intuition is trying to speak, and fear is the signal of activation, and the calling on you did not come from ambition but endurance, from surviving what should have ended you. Which is why delay is dangerous now, because forgotten identity leads to a life beneath assignment, and you are not here for entertainment. This is a disturbance, a warning before resistance hardens, and in the next 7 days, quiet pull will surface toward what you've postponed. And what you call intuition is instruction, and the pressure you feel is not random. It is evidence that something has already begun. Do not look for relief yet, because what is unfolding around you is not meant to soothe you. It is meant to wake you. And if your heart feels unsettled while hearing this, that unrest is not fear alone. It is recognition, because long before you learn to explain yourself, long before you learn to shrink your truth to survive, something within you was already listening, already observing, already waiting. And that part of you knows this message is not symbolic, not metaphor, not coincidence. Because there are moments when the unseen presses so close to the visible that separation thins. And this is one of those moments, my child, and you must understand that the fatigue you feel is not from effort, but from restraint, from holding back words you should have spoken, from tolerating spaces you outgrew, from carrying clarity in environments that benefit from confusion. And every time you ignored that inner pull, every time you chose familiarity over alignment, something inside you dimmed just enough to survive, but not enough to feel alive. And this is why rest never restored you, because you were not tired in your body, you were tired in your purpose. And now the pressure has returned, not to crush you, but to expose what has been avoided. Because avoidance has a sound in the unseen realms, and when it echoes too long, intervention follows, not as punishment, but as recalibration, because you are not designed to drift indefinitely. You are designed to respond, and there are forces that understand timing better than you do. Forces that know exactly when hesitation turns into loss, and they have been watching the way you negotiate with your own calling. how you keep saying soon instead of now, how you wait for certainty before movement, even though certainty only comes after motion, and this pattern has been noted, which is why resistance did not leave when you tried to improve yourself. It intensified, because improvement threatens comfort-based systems, and your growth disrupts arrangements that depend on your silence. And that is why people sensed change in you before you spoke it. Why conversations shifted, why energy changed, why certain connections suddenly felt heavy without explanation. Because when alignment approaches, incompatibility reveals itself, and this revelation is rarely gentle. It often arrives as discomfort, misunderstanding, and separation, and you have felt this already. The subtle pulling away, the unspoken tension, the way you no longer fully fit where you once belonged. And you tried to rationalize it, to minimize it, to convince yourself it was temporary, but the truth is simpler and heavier. You are outgrowing environments that cannot follow you, and this outgrowing process feels like loss before it feels like clarity. And clarity is expensive because it costs illusion, and illusion has been your temporary shelter. And shelters are difficult to leave, even when they no longer protect you. And that is why fear speaks louder when you stand near transition, because fear's role is not always to stop you. Sometimes it is to measure how serious you are about crossing. And right now you are standing at a threshold you cannot unsee because awareness has already occurred. And once awareness happens, return is no longer neutral. It becomes regression, and regression always extracts a price later. And this is why the inner tension has sharpened recently, why distractions stopped satisfying you, why surface-level pleasures lost their effect, why scrolling feels empty even when it fills time, because your soul has moved ahead of your habits. And when the soul advances while the body lingers, friction forms, and that friction manifests as restlessness, irritation, sadness without cause, longing without language. And you have labeled this many things: burnout, confusion, stress. But none of those words reach the root, because the root is this. You are resisting an invitation that has already been accepted on your behalf, and resistance to destiny does not cancel it. It only complicates the path toward it, and there is something else you must hear, even if it unsettles you, especially if it unsettles you. And that is this: not everyone who walks with you now is meant to cross the next phase with you, and some of those people are not malicious, not evil, not intentionally harmful, but they are aligned versions of you that are expiring, and expiration creates tension, and tension creates conflict, and conflict reveals truth, and truth is uncomfortable because it removes the comfort of ambiguity, and ambiguity has protected you from decision. And decision is what has been delayed, because once you decide, neutrality ends. And once neutrality ends, consequences accelerate, and acceleration is frightening when you are used to control. And control is something you learned early. Not because you were dominant, but because unpredictability taught you vigilance. And vigilance became identity, and identity became habit, and habit became comfort, even when it was heavy. And now that identity is being challenged, because the next phase of you does not operate from vigilance. It operates from authority, and authority requires presence. And presence requires honesty, and honesty dismantles roles you no longer need to play. And this dismantling process feels like death to the old self. And death, even symbolic, triggers resistance, grief, nostalgia, and doubt. And you have felt all of it, sometimes in the same hour, which is why your emotional state has felt inconsistent. Why some moments you feel clarity and strength, and other moments you feel small and overwhelmed. Because two versions of you are overlapping right now, one rooted in survival, one oriented toward purpose, and they cannot coexist indefinitely because survival asks, how do I stay safe? And purpose asks, how do I stay true? And these questions lead in different directions, and the longer you delay choosing which voice leads, the louder the conflict becomes, and that conflict will not resolve itself through distraction, achievement, or external validation, because none of those address the source. And the source is this unspoken knowing that you were not meant to live quietly, not meant to shrink your insight to preserve harmony, not meant to delay truth to maintain connection. And every time you did, a piece of you learned to disappear, and disappearing became familiar, and familiarity masqueraded as peace. But peace that requires self-erasure is not peace. It is suppression, and suppression always resurfaces, and when it does, it rarely asks politely. And this resurfacing is what you are experiencing now, this urgency that feels both frightening and necessary, and understand this carefully. Urgency does not mean panic. Urgency means timing, and timing is precise. And there are alignments that do not wait for comfort, and this alignment is one of them. And there are things being rearranged around you that you cannot see. Yet, conversations forming, paths shifting, opportunities dissolving before you can cling to them, because clinging is no longer sustainable, and sustainability now requires alignment, not endurance. And endurance has been your strength for so long that you mistake it for destiny. But endurance was training, not destination, and training seasons always end, even when the trainee wishes they wouldn't, because familiarity feels safer than exposure. And exposure is exactly what the next phase requires. Not exposure to crowds, not attention, but exposure to truth. Your truth, without filters, without disclaimers, without apology. And that level of authenticity is disruptive, not because it is loud, but because it is clear, and clarity destabilizes systems built on confusion. And this is why subtle opposition increases when clarity approaches, why doubt whispers louder, why old narratives try to resurface, why you suddenly remember every past failure, every mistake, every moment of weakness. Because fear's last strategy is memory manipulation, and it will present selective evidence to convince you that movement is dangerous, that waiting is wise, that silence is safer, but silence has already cost you more than movement ever could. And deep down, you know this, because regret has a distinct weight, and you have carried it quietly, and the fact that you are still here, still listening, still feeling this stirring means resignation has not fully claimed you. And that matters, because resignation is the true enemy. Not fear, not doubt, not fatigue, but resignation, the belief that this is all there is, and you have never fully believed that. Even when you tried to, even when life pressured you to accept less, even when circumstances narrowed your vision, there was always a part of you that resisted finality, that sensed more, that waited, and waiting has a limit, because waiting without preparation turns into stagnation, and stagnation erodes joy, and joy is not frivolous. It is fuel, and your fuel has been low, because you have been idling at a crossroads, engine on, direction undecided, and engines are not designed to idle indefinitely. They overheat, they fail, and breakdown follows. And what you call breakdown is often a forced decision point. And this moment is approaching that threshold, which is why this message feels heavy, personal, invasive, because it is not asking for agreement, it is asking for awareness. And awareness, once activated, cannot be undone. And you will notice this after this moment passes. How certain thoughts return with more clarity. How certain distractions feel hollow, how certain conversations feel misaligned, how your tolerance for inauthenticity decreases, how your patience for delay thins, how your inner voice becomes harder to ignore. And this is not because you are becoming restless, it is because you are becoming honest. and honesty disrupts routines built on compromise. And compromise has been your coping mechanism, not your calling. And coping is for survival phases, not for expansion phases. And expansion phases require risk, not recklessness, but risk nonetheless. The risk of being seen, the risk of choosing differently, the risk of disappointing expectations that were never aligned with your essence. And disappointment is something you fear because you have been the dependable one, the understanding one, the one who adapts, the one who absorbs tension so others can remain comfortable. And that role earned you appreciation, but cost you truth. And truth delayed does not disappear. It accumulates, and accumulation leads to pressure, and pressure seeks release. And release comes as decision, and decision is what is forming now beneath your awareness. And you will feel it crystallize soon, not as a loud command, but as a quiet inevitability, a sense that something cannot be undone. And when that moment arrives, hesitation will feel heavier than movement. And that is when you will understand why this unrest was necessary, why comfort was disrupted, why clarity was delayed until now. Because readiness is not about perfection, it is about willingness. And willingness is what is being tested. Not your strength, not your intelligence, not your worth, but your willingness to step forward without full visibility, to trust alignment over assurance, to choose truth over ease. And this test does not announce itself. It reveals itself through discomfort, through repeated nudges, through messages like this that seem to speak directly to the places you avoid naming. And if you are feeling exposed right now, that exposure is intentional, because concealment has ended, and the next phase does not respond to who you pretend to be. It responds only to who you are, and who you are is more than what you have allowed yourself to embody so far, and that gap between who you are and how you live is closing, and closures are not gentle, they are decisive, and this decisiveness is approaching, quietly, steadily, without negotiation, and you will recognize it not by relief, but by gravity, the sense that something real is demanding your attention, and attention once given changes everything, and that change has already begun.